Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. Now in this episode we're going to be looking at a loco that could possibly be beyond repair. Now this Duchess is rusty and completely seized on the front here. Now this was traded in at the local model shop, and the story goes that the shed this was in, there's dead spiders and everything on it. The people had to hack their way through the garden to get to the shed, and the railway that was in the shed had suffered greatly over time, as is demonstrated here. Now all of the wheels are solidified on the front bit of this loco. This is a tender drive Queen Elizabeth, quite a rare Duchess really, because it was only available in the train pack. And you can see it's completely and utterly seized. And now I will be honest, about 2 weeks leading up to making this video, I was dropping WD-40 of a cocktail stick onto the crank pins and all the screws on this model, because everything is rusted solid and I wanted to have the best chance of restoring this. The tender, ironically, isn't too bad. The traction tyres have perished. As you can see there, the left-hand one is cracked, and that traction tyre just pulls away. Now, when I first purchased this, it actually had a Britannia tender with it, which had been stood, and that was in a horrendous state. But then when we looked through the collection and found the correct tender, which is this one, this must have been stored somewhere else, because it isn't actually too bad. It's the later model, tender drive model, with pickups on all the tender wheels. But looking at the room in there, I want to DCC fit this if we can restore it, and there's not going to be a lot of room. I may get away with putting a small decoder down here or something, but we'll have a look at that later on. And a battery test, the motor's trying to run, but that's about it. It's given up. Obviously it's been sat in a damp shed for many years. This is an early 2000s model, so we're going to strip this down and we're going to try and restore this to running order. But that rust and it's everywhere, like on the tender drawbar, and like I said, everything is seized. So I've been dropping some WD-40 in very small quantities on the screws. I'm going to have to call in my big gun screwdriver. The modelling one's just not going to cut it. And I start by removing the pony truck screw, which eventually gives. The last thing I want is to snap any screws in the holes or anything. But that's unscrewing quite nicely now. And eventually it will come away. That allows me access to this screw here at the back underneath the foot plate, which is what keeps the chassis and the body together. Concentrating on this screw, that will eventually come out. And you can see just how rusty that is. There is a spring in there, or what's left of a spring anyway. Now it does look complete, but as you'll see in a minute, when I touch that spring it just collapses into powder. And you can see the rust staining everywhere. So I'm going to undo this screw now, and this was also very stiff. But it gives. I'm not sure it would have given so easy had I not been putting some WD on it. And I don't condone the use of WD-40, but I think this is a rare exception to the norm. There's even rust stained on the body shell. Now I'll give that a good clean later on. I've not seen this sort of pickup design before on these Duchesses. Get rid of that bit of dead spider. And then brush off all the remnants that are underneath around the wheels, so that we're working on a relatively clean model, as clean as it can be. Now you'll notice I'm not working on my normal work tray. That's got all that Milhome models bullied on it at the moment, so I'm making progress with that. So that's why I'm working on this mat that my mum and dad bought me. But again, another very stiff screw releasing the front bogie. So we'll undo that. There is a small brass washer under here, so don't lose that if you ever take one of these apart. But as I was saying, I've not come across one of these models before with this type of pickup arrangement, where the pickups are actually higher than the wheels and they're screwed into the chassis. I'm not sure how many Duchesses had this. There's the replacement spring tub. I'll look through that in a minute for a new spring. But yeah, I'm not sure how many Duchesses had that pickup arrangement. Maybe just at this one, but I've never seen it before. But it will make fitting a decoder to it very easy. So removing the base plate, there's no lubrication whatsoever, but the axles, the front two axles, are seized solid in the die-cast chassis plate. And the aforementioned pickup plate is held in place with 2 screws, although the wires pass through the chassis, and so you can't actually separate it unless you want to desolder it, which I didn't do. But as you'll see later, when I go to chip this model, I should have unsoldered it anyway, because I will replace the wires. But now we're getting somewhere. We can get access to the motion bracket now. That all needs to come out. And we'll have a look at these rusty side rods. I'm also undoing the crank pins to release the wheels. Again, these crank pins were soaked with a small amount of WD-40 just to try and loosen them up, which I'm happy it has. I was really worried because this model has been so damp that the screws would snap in the holes, which would then require either a new chassis block or new wheels. But luckily, so far, none of the screws have done that. They've all come away. If not a bit tight, but they've all come away. The centre wheel there, the side rods are actually stuck on the crank pin and the spacer washer. Usually they fall out, but it's not. And using my pair of long nose pliers just to remove the motion bracket there. And this side rod is actually stuck in with rust. So again, I'm going to have to work carefully because I don't want to break this motion bracket. I want to use as many original parts as I can to return this model to running order. So the cylinders, the side rod slide bars come out of the cylinders relatively easily. The rust isn't holding them in place. It just takes a little bit and then they come free. But you can see there the extent of how rusty these side rods have gone. It really is not nice at all. So I'm just scraping. You can scrape the rust off these slide bars. Look, they are just really bad. Now part of me thinks, well, maybe I can restore these, but you'll see in a moment that what happens. I take the cylinders off. The cylinders again are stained with rust. These will be cleaned up, but they're not broken. They do just clip into the chassis block, so we can reuse them. And then gentle persuasion with some smooth nose pliers will get that motion bracket out. There we go. And again, that will clean up with some warm soapy water. So what I'm going to do initially is the front bogie, the side rods and the screws with rust on, I'm going to put into a plastic tub. And I am going to give these a soaking with normal WD-40. Now I don't condone that for normal use on models. I usually use contact cleaner. But I'm using original WD-40 to try and loosen these parts. And after a couple of hours, you can see there just how manky that WD-40 has gone. But the screws have come up nice. All the rust has come off the screws. That will rub off. Look, that's all come up nice and clean. The seized wheels in the front bogie are also now nice and loose, so we can work on that. So that's loosened that up, which is good. I didn't want to try and remove those wheels off those axles to service this thoroughly while they were seized, because I might have ended up damaging the plastic parts of the wheels. And the side rods have all loosened. The rivets have all loosened. That was all seized. I mean, that one up the top there is still stiff, but working it in, it's now loosening itself. So everything has come a lot looser. This is a bit tangled, this one on the slide bars. But I'm still not convinced these are salvageable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the wheels, and these should pull off, which they do eventually. They're very, very stiff. I was so conscious not to break anything. But trying to get the wheels off the axle, eventually it will pop off. There we go. And you can see there is quite a bit of corrosion on the axle there. If this model had been left in that shed for another 6 months, this would have been beyond repair, I think. So I've got a soft brass brush now in my Dremel multi-tool, and I'm going to polish all these parts up and hopefully remove the corrosion so that we can reuse these. So just working slowly. I've got the Dremel set to a medium speed. I'm going to polish up all these rusted parts, look, and it does bring them back and gives them a nice finish. I'm even going to polish up that front coupling on the model. I'm not going to be replacing that at the moment, but everything on the front bogie does clean up rather nicely. So just working my way around there, it just removes all those rust marks back down to bare metal. And then I did the same on the side rods. I polished all these up. I've got the footage here, and I've speeded it up for you so you don't have to watch me. I did spend about half an hour doing this, but the more rust it removed off the side rods, the more and more it became apparent that these are beyond salvage. They probably were in the first place, but I like to have a look anyway. But when you removed all of the rust, or as much as possible, you'll see in a close-up shot that although the rust did come off, these are severely pitted and they are beyond any sort of use. I mean, look at that. That's just on one of them. And this wasn't even the worst one, to be honest. So they will be consigned to the bin and replacement sort. But the axles came up nice and clean. There is a bit of surface damage on them now where that rust was, but they are perfectly usable now that all the corrosion has gone. The only other thing I did with the Dremel was to clean up the pony truck to remove any remnants of rust on there. And that wheel in the pony truck is seized solid as well, and that's held in place with a little small metal plate which is friction fitted onto two die-cast lugs. So I'm just cleaning that plate now with the brass brush. I'm not going to clean the tender drawbar yet, I'll do that later on. And I also clean out the chassis where the wheels were to remove any oxidization, because two of the wheels were seized in this. So I'm just polishing it all up as best I can. And then going through my tub of Duchess spares. I've got two of these tubs, I don't know where it all came from. But I find one set of rods immediately. Now these are off an older model, but they will fit. They're very, very shiny, so I might buy myself some blackening solution just for these rods. Some of them have got a little bit of surface rust on, but nowhere near as bad as the originals. So that's one set, and then I do find a left-hand set. Then I cleaned all the driving wheels. This was done with a cotton bud and contact cleaner. All the wheel treads and wheel backs and axles were cleaned, and you can see just how much dirt's come off that. So it does need doing. So it's not the dirtiest model I've ever worked on. It certainly is the most rusty though. So all the driving wheels were cleaned like that. Those side rods were pulled off the centre crank pins, and everything was given a thorough clean with contact cleaner. The wheels, axles, side rods, crank pins, everything was cleaned thoroughly. I even cleaned the base plate up. This had a lot of rust staining on it from where the screws had gone through. So this as well was given a thorough clean. You can see the amount of dirt coming off it on the end of that cotton bud. A lot of the rust, obviously the rust on the plastic parts is just surface staining, so it came off quite easily. Same with the cylinders. As soon as it blast with the contact cleaner, and that rust staining virtually washed itself away. Although giving it a rub over with a cotton bud, and then I got the an old toothbrush just to clean all around the detail parts there, and those actually came up quite nicely. You have to work gently on the cylinders because you don't want to snap them. So yeah, that's all nice and clean now. Now, to remove this plate that holds this axle in, I just got a small screwdriver and under one side, but then it pinged off into the ether, as you'll see in slow motion. As soon as I got it off that plug, it just shot off into the air, and it actually landed on my shoulder. But so I retrieved it quite easily, but you can see the rust in there. No wonder the axle was seized solid. It definitely needed to come off. So that is terrible in there. Look at that axle. There's also hair all wrapped around it, which you just saw trapped to my finger. So again, with the brass brush in the Dremel, this was all given a thorough clean up. This axle was by far the worst. This almost looks like it's been sat in water. But I give it a clean up, and I do wonder whether or not this one's beyond salvage. But when the brass brush does its magic, again, surface pitting on the axle, but it is perfectly usable. This model is mine. It's not going anywhere, so I'm going to reuse the same axle. I also clean all in there, clean all that rust out, polish up the metal surface. The black paint inside this pony truck was also flaking off, so I reckon if this hasn't been sat in water, this front part, then it's had water dripping on it from the roof of this old shed this was in. Kind of like an Indiana Jones style, hacking through the garden to a lost shed to find a train set in the bottom. Now, I do have another train from this collection to do on Trash to Track. Obviously, being in a wet shed, the trains loaned themselves to being on this series. But the model shop also had a Class 58 from Hornby, a HST, all sorts. That was just, everything was Flying Scotsman, a Britannia. They were all rusty. Now the brass brush will fly off little segments like this. So if you ever use one of these brass brushes in a Dremel, it's imperative you use eye protection. I use a pair of safety glasses that I've had for years. But those little brass shrouds going in your eye are dangerous, so make sure if you ever do that, use some safety goggles. So that's my safety announcement out of the way. So I'm going to now fill this gap with some Labelle 106 grease where all that rust was. This is, I'm just putting this in here so that axle with the surface pitting is well lubricated, and it should prevent it from corroding in the future. And I also add a small amount of oil from the Fleischmann pin dropper because that will dilute the grease down a little bit and make it run nice and smooth. Now the plate was pushed on, but I actually ended up pressing that back on in the vise with two little metal weights each side just to press it back in place. The front bogie now is completely loose. The new side rods, I've slid that one into the cylinders already. And we're ready to start reassembling the front of the loco. So I'm going to get the chassis part here. I've cleaned the pickups off camera. I cleaned them with some Brasso, made sure they're nice and shiny. Loco driving wheels go in, making sure the centre one with the long crank pins are in the middle. And then a small amount of oil is added on each axle. There are no proper bearings on this model. But because this is thoroughly cleaned, and obviously we've cleaned everything off, there was no lubrication on it to start with. So everything needs replacing. So a bit of oil on there. The base plate clips in from the rear and then just drops in place. And then that small Phillips head screw is put in the middle to secure it in place. Just as so, and tighten that up. Now all driving wheels are turning lovely and freely. If you remember, before they were completely seized. As I said, these slide bars just push into the holes in the cylinder casting. The piston rod will go in the middle hole and the slide bars go in the rectangular holes that are pre-made in the plastic. When I can get this piston rod onto the slide bars, that is. There we go. And the linkage is all like that. And then this can be pushed home. There's the 2 or 3 holes. Just line them up and gently push it into place. And there's the motion bracket. So we put the cylinders back in. These clip in from underneath. And there's 4 die cast lugs, 2 each side. Slide it under one end and clip it in place with the other. There we go. That's the cylinders clipped back in place. And then that motion bracket can go in, making sure it's the right way round. That way was the wrong way. So put it in this way and then slide the motion into those rectangular holes. Now this again was thoroughly cleaned because obviously that other motion bracket was rusted solid in there. Once the motion's all in place, that can be clipped back to where it should be. Line it up and then just finger pressure clip it down. And the next thing, I'm going to re-screw this pickup plate back into place where it should be, making sure that all 6 pickups are touching the wheel backs. They may need slight adjustment, but it's a good idea. It's better than those pickups that go in from underneath and are easily bent. Like I said a bit earlier, I've never worked on a model with this sort of pickup arrangement in the loco part, and I think it's quite a good idea on these older models, to be honest. And it's very easy to fit a decoder to as well. As you'll see, with no room in the tender, you can solder the decoder directly to that brass strip. So once that's screwed in place, the motion side rods are rebuilt. I'm just getting the correct orientation here because there is a side rod with a linkage motion on it. The linkage part that goes towards the centre from the rear of the model, making sure that the oil box representations are facing upwards. Then the spacer washer is put on, and then the piston rod, and then the linkages are all put on, and then they are tightened up with the crank pins, which I also cleaned with a cotton bud and some WD-40 contact cleaner. I cleaned everything because of the oxidisation. So the crank pin that goes in the centre axle on this model is different to the others. It's very small. It's that one there without a shoulder on. There's two of these. These are for the centre wheel that holds all that in place. The other four crank pins with the shouldered, they're basically shouldered crank pins. They go on the outer wheels. And these were then all tightened up with my hex nut driver. Now, people often comment, where do I get these from? My pack of 3 came from Expo Drills and Tools. Apologies, my arm's in the way there. But yeah, mine came from Expo, came in 3 sizes, 1.5, 2 and 2.5 mil. And I find the 2.5 mil will do the majority, 98% of the stock. I use the 2.5 hex nut driver for crank pins. Next thing to go on was the front bogie. Not forgetting to put that brass washer in place. The screw was then tightened up. And then I did eventually find a spring. I didn't find one in that spring tub that I showed you earlier. I had a spare parts from a Hornby Princess, and this is off a Hornby Princess, but it's exactly the same diameter spring. So I'm going to use that. And then the pony truck, which is all thoroughly cleaned and obviously loose, the wheels have turned now, is put back in. And that screw is replaced, and that is the front virtually rebuilt. So that screw just goes back in there. And now hopefully when we turn this chassis over and push it along a length of track, it will all work as it should, and everything that was seized solid 10 minutes ago should now be working. So pushing it along, everything is loose, everything is working, although there is one problem. The second wheel on the front pony truck is not touching the rails. It's when you push it along, it's actually lifting up. So I'd look at that again and look at adjusting it. So I think it's the bar that connects to the model. So just getting my pliers to bend that down a little bit, just reshape it. Only do it gently, don't do it too much at a time. And then this time all the wheels are turning as they should. So that's the front part of the loco sorted. And now to service the tender drive. Now you've seen me service Ringfields before, but I'll run through it as a matter of course anyway. So inserting that large flat screwdriver down the front and then twisting it will unclip the motor. This has never been taken apart before. In fact, I don't think this model has got much mileage on it, if I'm totally honest. One of the wires is broken off the pickups there, but that's not going to matter. And it's one of the Ringfields. Now, a lot of people will moan about the fact it's got pickups on a traction tied wheel, but in one of my previous videos I proved that they do work well. Now when removing the brush holders, keep it held down with a finger, because the spring behind will push the brush holder up and the spring's likely to fly off into the ether. By doing it this way you can control the pressure and release it gently so you don't lose the springs. And the springs are absolutely immaculate. There is no dirt on this motor whatsoever. And the brushes, and as you'll see when I get the commutator out, there's just no wear on it at all. I don't think this model had much running before sadly the gentleman who owned it before me stopped using his railway and let it get all overgrown. You can see on the back here there's nothing, there's very little in the way of congealed grease and oil. But everything comes off, everything's nice and clean. But because of where this model's been stored in the damp, I'm servicing it all as a matter of course anyway. I can't get those 2 gears off without removing the wheels. But I have unclipped and I'm going to remove the motor faceplate, and as you'll see, and get these wires all out of the way because it's all soldered together. Look at that. It's absolutely pristine, and the brushes, there's just no use on it at all. So it's a 3-pole motor. But I will give it a clean up just as a matter of course, because as I said, it's been stored in that damp shed for who knows how many years. I mean, that rust on them sidewalls doesn't just occur overnight. That's been stood there for a good while. So again, contact cleaner on a cotton bud just to clean the commutator of the very little dirt there was on there. Just give it a rub over like that. Yeah, there's a little bit of dirt on it, but nowhere near as bad as some of them. On the back side of the motor, there's very, very little. The yellow stuff you can see on the cotton bud will be the congealed oil from the original factory assembly of this model. Now, one thing I did find is when I took the wheels off the tender, the axles were very, very stiff in those bearings. That they should come out a lot easier than that. So obviously there was some servicing required, but those axles were very, very stiff indeed. So just prising the wheel off, you can see that just trying to pull that axle out. There we go. So I'm going to spray some contact cleaner down there and give that a thorough clean out and clean the axles as well, because as freer running as this is, it'll have less strain on the motor. The gears were given a quick wipe over again with cotton bud and meths. I did use meths on the gears. And then once it's all cleaned, and thoroughly clean that is, you can start reassembling it. Now you can see me here, again with the footage speed up a bit, just cleaning the motor plate and all the axles and the wheel treads. Even the wheel treads without the traction tyres on, because the traction tyres do pick up current. And now it's time to reassemble the model. Now to reassemble the model, I've put new traction tyres on the driving wheels, and I'm going to put a bit of Labelle 106 grease on the gear spindles, because again we've cleaned out anything off that was on there has been cleaned away. I'm soon going to need a new tube of this Labelle, because this one's getting a bit empty. And then the gears were put back in place with the smaller gears at the bottom and the larger double gear facing down with the small gear faces downwards, and then put it on that spindle, making sure it interlocks with all the other gears correctly. And then the gear retainer can also be put back on. And there we go. Where's the gear retainer? Oh, there it is. I'll find it. That just had a quick wipe over, and then that slides under the top restraint, and then the two holes hold the gears in place. Very, very small drop of oil on there because the gears rotate in that brass part. And that's the drivetrain all rebuilt. A small amount of Labelle 106 on the pinion gear, that was spread through the drivetrain. Small amount of oil in those brass bearings, and then the axle. You can see how easy that axle slid back in there in comparison to what it was when I pulled it out. And then the wheels are pressed back onto the axles, and then the gauge is sorted with that gauge I showed in the last episode to make sure that the back-to-backs are correct. Motor faceplate clipped back in place, and then the brushes and springs and brush retainers all screwed back, and then the wires were unsoldered off the brush retainers, ready for digitally fitting later on. The only other thing I did was I removed the wire off that plate and snipped the wire off the tender drawbar. Because this model is going to be digital and the chip's going to be in the loco, I'm going to hardwire this loco to the tender, but in such a way that if I want to sell it in future as a DC model, it will be very easy to reconvert back to DC running. So everything's now back together on the motor, and I'll get the battery, and remember before this wouldn't run, but now with the battery on the motor terminal, on the brush terminals, it's running lovely and powerful, just as a Ringfield motor should. So that goes back in there. I actually should go in front first into the clip. Yeah, come on, stop looking at it. There we go, and then clip it in at the back, and it goes in with a satisfying snap, just like that. And what I'm going to do is the two holes at the front of the tender, you can see I've soldered the DCC decoder to that pickup. I'm going to link the pickup wires together, and I'm going to feed them through the chassis where the wires go originally, and then up through those two rivet holes in the front of the tender, and wire it up that way, so that the wires are nice and neat and out the way. And to keep the loco and tender together, I put a length of heat shrink on the tender drawbar, and then a length of bigger heat shrink, and shrink that on, so it acts as like a plug, and it will stop the loco and tender from separating. So just like that, it's all wired up. Decoder soldered to those pickups in the front. The wires run through here to the pickups and to the motor, and there's that bit of heat shrink you can see there. Believe it or not, that tender drawbar still looks white and dirty, but I have cleaned that twice with contact cleaner. It just wouldn't come off. So the tender body shell, I've given that a wash with warm soapy water. That clips back in place. The loco, when I was cleaning this, the deflectors fell off it. They're not broken, they just fell off. But giving it a wash in warm hand soap has really brought the paintwork up. Don't use fairy liquid because fairy liquid is aggressive, and I have known that to remove paint finishes in the past. So to put the chassis back on the loco, you engage the front clips under the smoke box, and it should drop down into place like that, and then you can replace that rear screw under the footplate. As an aside, I got a driver and fireman figure, glued these in on the footplate because my dad always moans if you see steam engines running without a driver and fireman. So these were pre-painted driver and fireman. I just cut the bases off, a little bit of Loctite, held in place for a few seconds, and they will stay in the cab, and it will appease him when he sees it running in the garden. You've got a few seconds for adjustment with Loctite. It doesn't set instantly, but that you can see there that fireman figure fell over, but he's now stood nicely in the cab. I also found one of these sprues with the Hornby vacuum pipes on, so I cut those off and glued those in the front where the pre-cut hole is in the buffer beam, just to finish the model off. I put one on the front and one on the tender. And then the deflectors clip into place. There's a small hole on the running board, and then a lug that clips into the smoke box on the side, and you can align it up. Takes a bit of aligning. But there we go, that deflector's clipped back in place. So I've used a Bachmann ESU decoder, and I know that's DC compatible, so it's on the track for its first test run. And the Hornby Duchess is back in running order. Now, as I said, those new side rods off the older model are very shiny, and I have ordered some blackening solution to paint on when that arrives. There's also various other engines in the background being worked on. So I've brought the Trash to Track turntable back into use for this because I thought it'd be a nice change. I haven't used this for a while. And this is what we started with. This Duchess had been left in a shed, left in water if I didn't know any better. The side rods were rusty. All the wheels on the front loco part were seized completely. The tender drive section wasn't too bad because that wasn't actually connected to this Duchess. That was on a Britannia or somewhere else in the shed. But I did think when I picked this up at the model shop, I did think this was a genuine no-hoper, thinking that the rust had spread. But this is what she looks like now. Thoroughly overhauled, cleaned, relubricated, and now is DCC fitted with a crew and is back as a running model. Now I'm really pleased with how this turned out because there was times when I was looking at this initially and every screw on the front was seized up. I really did think this was going to be beyond repair. But soaking those screws with a little bit of WD-40 over a couple of weeks and then working on it, cleaning it all up, has brought Queen Elizabeth back to a lovely running order. And washing this with hand soap has actually brought a lovely sheen onto the paintwork on the model. Now it is quite a rare Duchess, so I believe it was only available in a train pack. And I hope you'd agree we've done a good job bringing this Duchess back from the brink. And it looks quite smart now. These Duchesses of this era seem to look quite smart. And here she is running in the garden. For the first time in God knows how many years this has actually ran. If you've got an engine or anything you'd like to see repaired, DCC fitted or featured on the channel, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. Have a look and get it sent over, and who knows, it may even feature in an episode all of its own. I really hope you'll agree this has been a well worthwhile restoration from that rusty seized condition to now racing along in the garden. And I look forward to reading your comments. And please like the video, it does help the channel. So thanks again for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.